Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shir, 3 chapters per day. Lesson 169 will be covering Hilchos Pesulei Hamukdashim from chapter 2 until 4th. Today we are marking in the calendar the day of Isru Chag, which Be'ashgacha Potis happened to be the day where we recite the Hallel in the daily Tehillim Shir. And in the Tehillim Shir, we're mentioning something about Isru Chag ba'avosim ad karnos hamizbeach, and our sages are teaching us kol ho'ise isur lechag be'achilo u'shtio. If anybody who is making a tie, a connection to that holiday with more eating and drinking, the ma'ale'ol of akosov, it's being viewed, it's being credited to him as Bono Mizbeach vehikrivolov korban, as he built a Mizbeach and he brought a korban. The idea is that he demonstrate that not only the holiday is precious for him, but anything that is in proximity to the holiday is very much meaningful to him. And indeed, it is Ashgocha Potis that the central topic of today's lesson is different thing that may disqualify of the korban, and more specifically about the hazoas hadam, about the sprinkling of the blood. Once upon a time, the Rebbe explains how come, as far as the offering that used to be burned to the mizbeach in all the korbanos is the blood and the fats, and the blood represents the enthusiasm a person has, and the fats represents a pleasure, as we know from the Talmud that with the story of Rabbi Yochanan, where he was explaining to the minister that was just found out that he was appointed to be the king of Rome, that he was gaining actual fats thanks to the pleasure he was receiving by the news he got at that time. And the point is that a person, as far as his enthusiasm and the pleasure, he must channel it towards Hashem, towards God, towards spirituality. And in the first chapter, the focus is around those type of offerings where their blood is being sprinkled on the Mizbeach HaChitzon and the external Mizbeach, that though that each and every type of a korban has a specific location where the zriko, where the sprinkling must take place. For example, by a oilas behemo, it is in the lower part of the Mizbeach, and by chatos, it is in the upper part of the Mizbeach. The amount of sprinkled, while by chatos it's 4 and oilo and shlomim is 2, the way it's being sprinkled, while by a oilo and shlomim is via throwing the water, the blood, when it comes to chatos is actually putting the blood on the Mizbeach. So in this actual chapter will be dealt a scenario of different deviations from the actual ideal type of zriko. So for example, when we're talking about the quantitative deviation, instead to have 4 sprinkling, he gave 1 sprinkle. So though ideally he should not be doing it, but b'di'evad, he was atoning for the sin. Also, if he was just throwing the blood, it's called bishpicho, instead to do it via hazoil, he was also, the korban is kosher, since the Torah was mentioning Vedam Zvochecho Yishofech, So since the Torah was not makpid on the amount, so for that reason, b'diavad it will be fine. However, when we're speaking about those bloods that needs to be placed upon the Mizbeach HaPnimi, for example, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippurim, if he have changed the amount, the korban is possible. As far as location, in the case where he switched the location, for example, instead to sprinkle the blood on the upper part of the Mizbeach, he sprinkled in the lower part of the Mizbeach, or the opposite. So the meat of the Zevach will be pasul, will be disqualified. However, the Bailim, the owner of the Korban, was atoned, since after all, the blood came to the Mizbeach. It is important to note that in order to disqualify the basar, the meat, this type of the wrong sprinkle must be done only by a person who is fit to do the hazoel. If a person who was pasul to do the hazoel, whether he was tomei or any other type of psul, since he is disqualified, so his wrong hazoyos are not really disqualifying the meat, and as long as there is some blood left in the behemoth, a kosher person who is fit to do this sprinkling, he should go and collect the blood from the behemoth in a proper vessel, and he should do the hazoes then. Then, in the continuation of the chapter, there is a discussion about bloods of different kodoshim that they got mixed together. As long as they have the identical amount of matonos, he should, despite the fact they are mixed, he should just sprinkle those identical matonos that both of them will take care on both of them. At the moment that some of them have two hazoyos and some of the bloods are from zvochim that require one hazoyos, he should apply the minimum amount of the hazoyos. When the bloods that was supposed to be sprinkled on the top of the Mizbeach have mixed with the blood that are supposed to be sprinkled on the bottom of the Mizbeach, so in such a case, he should not sprinkle, he should just place the blood in the ammo, is the drainage system. However, if he took the initiative without asking and he just sprinkled this blood, part of it lemailo on the upper part of the Mizbeach and lemato to the lower part of the Mizbeach, then he was yoitze. And same thing will apply if two bloods, that one of them must be sprinkled in the heichol and the other one needs to be sprinkled in the Mizbeach, they got mixed. Again, he can bring, if he took the initiative and bring one bifnim and one bachutz, he was yoitze, as long as we're not talking over here a blood that was supposed to be sprinkled in the Kodesh HaKodoshim and later came out from there before the entire amount was sprinkled. So anything that left the original territory of the, whether it is Kodesh HaKodoshim or whether to the Heichol, to externally, so in such a case, with this blood, will be able to puzzle the entire korban. In a case that blood was mixed with water, it is very important what is in the bottom. Since we are quite introduced to the rule of Tatoe Govar, that always the bottom part of the mixture will overwrite, will determine. So for that reason, if the water was below and the blood came into the water, so in such a case, he cannot use this mixture into the actual hazoyo. However, if it was the opposite, the blood was at the bottom and into the blood water fell in, as long as there is a visible image of blood, then the usage of this mixture will be fine. In the second chapter, the Rambam deals about a dislocation of the shchito. While previously we were speaking when mistakenly the zriko, the sprinkling of the blood, was done in the wrong location. So in the second chapter, the Rambam deals in situation where the actual slaughter was done in the wrong location. For example, we know that Kodshei Kodoshim must be slaughtered next to the Mizbeach on the north side of the tabois, those rings that were used in order to shecht the animals right there. So instead to do it there, but sofin in the north side, he have done it on top of the Mizbeach. So though he shouldn't be doing it lechatchilo, but after the fact, it will be fine, since the Torah specifies the function of the Mizbeach as a place of vezovach to olov, you should slaughter upon him as oilosecho ve'es shlomecho. However, the intestine and the internal parts of the behemoth must be washed underneath, not on the Mizbeach. So for that reason, he needs to carry them back to the actual floor or the table where they were washed, and after completing the rinsing process, bring them back to the Mizbeach. There is another ruling where it is based on a pasuk, Kol hanoigeya b'mizbeach ikdosh. Anything that touched the Mizbeach should not come down. However, there is a very precise distinction what type of disqualified part of the korban can or cannot go on top of the Mizbeach. And the distinction is whether the korban was disqualified after he was already in the process of the offering, which means initially it was perfectly fine and fitting and qualified korban, and in the process the korban became problematic due to tum'o, or lino, slept over, or pigul. In such a case, any part of the animal that really belongs to the ishim, which generally refers in a case of a oilo to the entire behemoth besides the skin, and in a case of the chatos, most of the chatois and cholois is a reference to the muim. In such a case, the part that touched the Mizbeach should remain on the Mizbeach. However, if we're speaking over here about a psul that was there to begin with, it was not disqualified in the process of the offering. It was there to begin with. For example, if we're speaking over here about a live animal or a animal that was slaughtered at night, so before since night is not a time that is roi leshchito, so was not a moment that the behemoth was really fitting, or if the behemoth was a nirba or avodah zoro that were not roi to begin with to the mizbeach, in such a case the rule doesn't apply to them and they will have to move away from the mizbeach. Another case which really can demonstrate a very important nuance between two so-called disqualified offerings, where in one case the part will remain on the mizbeach and in the other case won't remain in the mizbeach. For example, if a zal, someone who is not a kohen, made the meliko. Meliko is the way how a bird offering is being slaughtered by the nail of the kohen. So if Azar have done it, though it is a disqualified meliko, but it's still called meliko, and for that reason it will be viewed as an item that was disqualified in the process Pesulei b'kodesh, in the process while he is already in the system of kodesh, and for that reason such a bird who touched the mizbeach lo yered, should not be removed from the mizbeach, should remain on the mizbeach. On the other hand, a koimetz, when we're talking about a flower offering where the koimetz was done by someone who is not a kohen, this type of offering should come down because was no kedusha whatsoever to begin with. On the other hand, if we're speaking over here about a proper boso that must be eaten and consumed by the kohanim, such a boso should be removed from the mizbeach, given the fact it is not roi leishim, it doesn't fit to be burnt on top of the mizbeach, because to be burnt on the mizbeach you have to be a qualified component for burning of the mizbeach, and any item that is there for the consumption of the kohanim cannot be burned on top of the mizbeach. While the mizbeach hachitzoin will be very selective and will be mekadesh only something that is roi loi, it will sanctify only something that in theory fits him, and for that reason boso that must be eaten is not mekadesh. The internal mizbeach will be mekadesh both, whether it is roi loi or not roi loi. For example, roi loi fits to the mizbeach hapnimi will be a reference to a ktoires. Einoi roi loi will be a reference of koimetz mincho, because koimetz mincho is something that is roi to the mizbeach hachitzoin and not roi on mizbeach hapnimi. But nevertheless, if it came in connection with the mizbeach hapnimi, lo yered, it should remain there. Another subject that is being dealt in the second chapter is about the kli shores. Kli shores is the holy utensils that, as we have learned, that they are mekadshim, sanctifying their contents. But in order for them to sanctify their contents, a few requirements are necessary. First of all, they must be located in the temple, be a intention to be mekadesh, and also they must be shleimim. Any damaged utensil cannot sanctify the contents of that utensil. Any mizbeach, any altar that was damaged, all the kodoshim that were slaughtered and they were actually placed upon him will be posul, since there is no proper mizbeach out there at that point to sprinkle the blood. And since the blood sprinkling is a very central and critical stage in the process of atonement, so for that reason, those offerings are pasul, they are disqualified. However, if there is living animal out there, and while the mizbeach was damaged, obviously I cannot slaughter and use their blood to sprinkle. However, when the mizbeach was rebuilt, they will be fit for an offering, because the rule is ein ba'alei chaim nidchin. Something that is alive cannot be suspended permanently from the access of being a korban. In the final chapter of today's lessons, the discussion is around 4 types of chatois that they will have to die, not to be slaughtered. The way that they will be dying is simply bringing them into a room, lock them in, and until they just gonna die. The chatois hameisois is 4 situations which are halocha leMoshe miSinai by tradition. When a chatos gave birth, vlad chatos, or tmuras chatos, a chatos was exchanged for another chatos, that the ruling is that typically in another korban, both of them will have the same status, but not by chatos. There is a 3rd situation, chatos shemeisu ba'aleo, if the owner who brought it died, and then there is a chatos that were lost and found after the person was already atoned. It is important to note that this halacha is relevant only to a chatos yochid, only to a chatos that was brought by an individual. Chatos of tzibur, they are not applicable for the following reason. First of all, there is no way that will be any vlad, any children, because the chatois tzibur, they are all male. Chatos tzibur cannot have tmura, and tzibur cannot die, as we have just recently learned in Parshas Ha'azinu, where God Almighty says, Chitzai chalebon, chitzai kolim, vehem einom kolim. Almighty says, I may run out of eros, but I'm never gonna run out of them, of the tzibur, of the Jewish people. So those cases is when those cases by a chatos yochid occurring, the chatos need to die. However, throughout the entire chapter, the Rambam limits each and every one of those cases to a very specific scenarios. For example, we spoke before that only if he initially had a chatos and brought a second one instead of her, and the first one were found after the atonement. But let's say in a case that he found before the atonement, in such a case, he can bring whoever chatos he would like, and the other one will be brought for anedovo. After I will so-called have him ire at sheipil b'mum ire, he will go out in the field until a damage, a defect will occur in him. He will be sold, and the proceeds that I will receive will go for purchasing oilo. Though in theory he can be immediately a oilo, but a gzeiro, a decree, mitzad, people may apply or confuse between le'achar kaporo and lifnei kaporo, and for that reason the ruling is that first tireat she'ipol bo mum, a damage, a defect must occur, and then will be sold, and the proceeds will go to nedovo. Another limitation where the Rambam excludes the outcome of chatois hamesois, for example, if instead it was lost, it was robbed, it was stolen, in such a case, after it was found, it doesn't have to die. There is a case when a person, to begin with, he was designating two animals, and he said that he is giving himself an option: whoever I would like to bring, I will bring. So in such a case, it's not a tmur chatos, because initially he have programmed them that they will be linked according to his selection in the future. In such a case, he indeed can go and choose whichever he would like to choose for the atonement, and the second one will go amongst all other animals until a defect will appear and she will be sold for nedovo. Though that in cases of halocho leMoshe miSinai, I will tend to take the severe ruling, like any sfeiko de oiraiso, anything that is biblical, or halocha leMoshe miSinai, and in a case of a sofek, I will be machmir. But if a person sent from overseas a chatos, and I don't know whether he is alive or not, despite the fact that there is doubt that this particular animal can be a chatos shemeisu be'aleho, chatos that her owner have died, nevertheless, I will go ahead and bring it as a chatos, since there is a chazoko, the presumption that he is chai. So it's not a sofek. The presumption brings it up, upgrades the determination as a vados. By a oshom, contrary to chatos, all those scenarios whereby chatos will be a chatos hamesois, they'll have to die. In a case of a oshom, the ruling will be that will be yire ad she'ipol bo mum. He will immediately have to be amongst all other animals in the field until a defect will appear to him, will be sold, and the proceeds will go to nedovo.